Welcome back to my channel and to another creative video. So I've got a fun little series I'm going to be offering sprinkled throughout my channel called The Broke Artist Guide. And it is me sharing a variety of different supplies, supply hacks for those of you working on a budget or those of you out there that just want to explore more economical ways to get creative. And today I am starting with Crayola markers or any kind of water-soluble marker. And I really like Crayolas because they're pretty accessible. You can get them in a grocery store, an art supply store, office supplies. You can readily get Crayolas pretty easy. And I often stock up on them during back to school time of year. They're often pretty cheap and affordable. And I actually really like how pigmented they are. They last for quite a while and you can use them in a variety of different ways in your art surfaces and projects. One of my favorite ways is to use them as both a pigment and something that I can draw with. So I often like to start with a scribbly surface that I then dilute with water and use it a little bit like ink or watercolors to create a really nice textural background. And then once that background is dry, I love going back in and drawing over the top of everything. Now for this video, I wanted to actually limit myself to just using Crayolas, and at the very end, I'm going to be using a micron pen, a black pen, to go over the top of some of this, just to show you all how far you can take a really simple, economical supply. In my own life, I've had lots of chapters where I've had very little money. In fact, when I was an art major, I often couldn't afford a lot of the supplies on my supply list, and I would have to get creative with what I'd buy in order to even take a class. And so throughout my lifetime of making art, I feel really passionate about talking and sharing ways that you can use really simple supplies and still get creative. Those of you that take my classes out there will know that I always say that you don't need the most expensive supplies to make cool art or to have fun experimenting. And so it's really important for me moving forward to continue to share more ways that you can use simple, accessible supplies and materials if you want to just get playing with creativity. Now, oftentimes, cheaper supplies are not always going to be archival. So in my own process, I like to pick supplies that I use for different projects. For example, when I'm working in my art journal, when I'm working in sketchbooks, when I'm creating YouTube videos or class samples and tutorials, I often select more economical supplies. But if I'm creating something that might hang on the wall or something I will sell, maybe something I'm creating for a brand or a company, I pull out my more expensive supplies, or I will go invest in supplies that are more archival or higher quality. That's how I kind of divide things up in my process over here, even running a small business with my art and creativity. So anytime you see me working in an art journal, I often pull out things that maybe didn't cost a lot, or I will use up materials that have a little bit of paint left. Even if my markers are dried up, I find ways to put them to use in playing around on those surfaces. And as an artist who's had chapters in my life where it was really hard for me to afford supplies, it's really important for me to always find ways to share some inspiration with you all when it comes to working and creating on a budget. And so I want to inspire you in this video to see how far you can take those Crayola markers. Now keep in mind, any kind of water-soluble marker is going to work for the kind of process that I'm working through in this video. Anything that can be dissolved with water. So you don't want permanent markers for this. You want something that you can water down and use both as a pigment, as a wash, but also be able to draw with it at the same time or color. I often start with those washes and then I will go back in and dissolve some of those lines and areas as I begin to build my surface. For this particular surface, I picked something that's in my wheelhouse. I wanted to do a floral surface that's going to have a lot of color, but again, I'm limiting myself to use those Crayolas and then finishing things off with my favorite drawing pen, just so y'all can see that you can use them in a variety of different ways. I love watering them down because you can get that really nice pigment plus a little bit of texture if you're scribbling or drawing and using some of that line work. I typically have a water vessel next to me with a couple of different brushes, so at any point I can pull out that wet brush, dissolve and water down any pigment that I want to dissolve or lighten up on that surface. And then I I tend to just work back and forth. I will work my way across that surface, drawing lines, maybe scribbling or coloring, using that water to dissolve some of that pigment, and then continuing to work over the top. And what I'm going to do in this surface is really elevate things through the use of lines and contrast, but just using those Crayola markers. And my goal is just to really show and prove to you that you don't need fancy stuff to make cool surfaces or even play around with different concepts, techniques, and inspiration. In fact, some really simple economical supplies will get you far in your creativity, especially if you're practicing, playing, or experimenting. My art journal is often the place that I do this, and I love to see how far I can take supplies, see if I can kind of push the limits with what they're even supposed to do. So if I'm in a pinch for some kind of pigment, if I'm wanting to travel but without like all my sets of watercolors or acrylic paint, Crayolas are actually the first thing that I grab and fill a pencil pouch, grab my art journal and maybe a couple of favorite drawing pens, and I am good to go. With those Crayola markers, I have the ability to create surfaces that look a lot like watercolors, playing around with washes and pigments. But then I can also go in, I can draw with those Crayolas, I can color, I can add more saturated color, and then work back and forth between all those different techniques. So for anybody out there working on a budget, or for anybody who just wants to play around with supplies in a different, unique way, one of my top choices is actually just a box or a set of Crayola markers. It'll take you far, they last a long time, they have great pigment, and you can use them in a variety of different ways. So I'm going to let y'all watch me work through this surface, and it's going to change a lot. I'm going to work back and forth between using my markers to add color, lines, and detail, as well as using that brush and water to dissolve some of that color and really elevate this surface in unique ways. I'm going to finish things off by using my black micron pen at the very end to outline and add additional details just to finish things off. And I'm hoping this video and future videos where I share more economic solutions when it comes to using those supplies really inspires you to maybe start looking around your house for things you might already have on hand to use in your creative process. Or if you're out there working on a budget and you want to make art, I just hope you feel inspired to perhaps use things that don't cost a lot of money. We don't need to buy the biggest, the best, the fanciest, most expensive supplies to make great art or to have fun making that art. And I'm hoping this little series as I move forward in my channel really inspires you all to look at those supplies in a different way and even start finding creative ways to work on a budget.